Okay, so today we're doing a deep dive on something I think a lot of people might find themselves facing at some point, and it can be kind of a tricky situation to navigate.
Mm-hmm.
It's what to do if you get hit with one of those legal demands for payment. Through that process they call a processo monitorio.
Yeah. I mean, it's not something you want to deal with, but it's good to be prepared, right?
Absolutely, being prepared is key. And for this deep dive, we've been looking at information from a law firm, MCHM Abogados. They're based in Almeria, Spain. But what's interesting is they've got this nationwide reach, working with all sorts of clients.
Yeah, from what I understand, they handle individuals, companies, even public organizations. They really cover the spectrum.
Exactly. And their whole philosophy seems to be about providing really top-quality service, being super efficient and responsible, and, of course, totally professional.
Right. So they emphasize commitment to their clients, getting things done effectively, and maintaining high standards throughout.
Okay, so processo monitorio. It might sound like something straight out of a law textbook.
Right, a bit, yeah.
But basically, it boils down to this. It's a fast-track legal route for creditors to claim money that they believe is owed to them.
It's specifically designed for debts that are pretty straightforward. They call them liquid debts.
Liquid debts. What does that actually mean?
It means the amount owed is a specific known figure. It's not something that's still up in the air or being disputed.
Ah, okay. So it's not about those situations where you're arguing over how much is actually owed.
Yeah.
This is when there's a clear-cut amount that's established.
Yeah, exactly. The debt has to be determined, meaning it's clearly established, and it's got to be past due and payable.
Right, so no wiggle room there.
Not really, no.
So it's designed to make things quicker and easier for the person or organization that's claiming the money. But what about the person on the other end of this demand? What are their options?
Well, that's what we really want to unpack today.
Yeah, let's get into the nitty-gritty.
What can you actually do if you're facing a processo monitorio? What are your rights, and what are the super important deadlines you absolutely can't miss?
Let's break it down step by step. First off, how does this whole thing even get started? How would you even know that someone's initiated this processo monitorio against you?
It all starts when the creditor takes their claim to court.
Okay.
And it's not just a matter of saying, hey, this person owes me money. They've got to provide actual proof.
Proof? Like what kind of proof?
Think invoices, contracts, any documentation that supports their claim. They can't just show up empty-handed.
So there has to be some substance to their claim, some evidence backing it up.
Yep, that's crucial.
So once they file this claim with the court, what's the next step? How do you, the person who supposedly owes the money, find out what's going on?
Well, you'd get an official notification directly from the court.
Ah.
And that notification would include a demand for payment of the specific debt they're claiming.
So that's your first heads up that a processo monitorio is in motion. All right, so imagine you've just received this notification. It's probably not the best feeling in the world, right?
Probably not.
But let's look at the options you have. What's the most straightforward thing you could do at this point?
Well, the most direct route, if you agree with the debt, is to just pay it.
Pay the whole amount.
Yeah, the full amount that they're claiming.
But it's not always just the original amount you owed, right? There could be other costs added on top.
You're right. It might include interest that's built up over time, plus maybe some of the legal fees the creditor had to pay to get the ball rolling.
So it's not just that initial amount, it's the whole shebang.
The total sum that's on that court notification, that's what you'd need to pay to settle it.
Okay, so option one, pay up in full. But what if you look at that demand and you think, hang on a minute, this isn't right. Maybe you're convinced you already paid it, or the amount they're asking for is just way off.
Yeah.
What can you do then?
That's where your second key option comes in. You can formally oppose the claim.
Formally oppose it. How do you do that?
You have to file a written opposition with the court, explaining exactly why you disagree.
So you can't just send them a quick email saying, no, not paying.
No, it's got to be a proper, detailed document, clearly setting out your reasons.
What kind of reasons would fly in this situation? What are legitimate grounds for opposing a claim like this?
Well, one big one is the inexistence of the debt.
Meaning what?
It could be that the debt never existed, or maybe you've got proof that you already paid it in full.
Gotcha. So if there's a genuine misunderstanding, or if you've got receipts showing you're all square, you can use that to oppose the claim.
Exactly.
What else? What are some other valid reasons?
Another common one is errors in the claimed amount.
So maybe you agree that you owe something, but the figure they're throwing at you is just wrong.
Could be a miscalculation on their part, or maybe they didn't factor in payments you've already made.
Oof. That'd be frustrating. So good record keeping is super important.
Absolutely vital.
Okay, any other reasons you could oppose the claim?
Yeah, there's also the concept of prescription of the debt.
Prescription. That sounds a bit medical. What does it mean in this context?
It's essentially like a statute of limitations. Under standard law, there's a specific period after a debt becomes due that the creditor has to take legal action. If they miss that window, the debt might not be legally enforceable anymore.
So even if you did owe the money at some point, if they've waited too long to come after you, you might be off the hook.
Potentially, yes. But the exact time limits vary depending on the type of debt, so you'd need to look into the specifics.
All right, so it's not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing. It depends on the nature of the debt itself.
Precisely.
Okay, is there anything else you could use as grounds for opposition?
One last one that's specifically mentioned is abusive clauses.
Abusive clauses. What does that refer to?
This comes into play if the debt originated from a contract with terms that are super unfair or go against consumer protection laws.
So if the debt is based on some shady clause that's designed to exploit people, you could use that to fight back.
Yes, that's the idea. Those abusive clauses could make the debt, or at least parts of it, invalid.
Interesting. So it's not just about whether you owe the money or not. It's also about whether the agreement itself was fair in the first place.
Exactly.
Now, before we jump into what happens if you do decide to oppose the claim, is it worth mentioning any other options at this initial stage?
Yeah, there's one more thing that can be really valuable.
What's that?
Trying to work things out directly with the creditor.
So skip the whole courtroom drama and just try to reach an agreement.
Yeah, it's called out-of-court negotiation.
Makes sense. It's
Yeah.
probably a lot less stressful than getting lawyers involved.
Definitely. And it could save everyone time and money in the long run.
So even before you file that formal opposition, it might be worth reaching out to the creditor and seeing if you can find some common ground.
Right, maybe you can negotiate a lower payment, agree on a payment plan, or find some other solution that works for both sides.
So it's always worth exploring that avenue first.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's talk deadlines. I know this is where things get super important. You can't just sit on this notification forever, right?
Absolutely not. The clock is ticking from the moment you receive that court document.
So how much time do you actually have?
You get 20 business days.
20 business days. That's it.
That's all you get.
And that's from the day you receive the payment demand to file your opposition.
Correct.
That doesn't feel like a lot of time, especially if you need to gather evidence or get legal advice. What happens if you miss that deadline?
Well, things get tricky. The court can basically issue a decree that ends the processo monitorio.
What does that decree actually mean for you?
It means they're going to enforce the debt against you. The creditor can start taking further legal action to get their money.
So that could involve things like seizing assets or garnishing wages.
It could, yeah.
Not good. So missing that deadline is basically like saying, okay, fine, I'll pay whatever you're asking for.
Essentially, yeah. You lose your chance to fight back within this specific legal process.
Okay, so let's rewind a bit. Let's say you do file a formal opposition within those 20 business days. What happens next? Does it all just go away?
Not quite. The processo monitorio morphs into a regular lawsuit.
A lawsuit. Okay, so things are getting more serious.
A bit more, yeah.
What kind of lawsuit does it become?
Depends on how much money's involved. If it's under $6,000, it becomes a juicio verbal, which is like a faster, more streamlined type of trial.
Juicio verbal. So I guess that literally means verbal trial?
Yeah, it's a bit less formal, but if the debt's over $6,000, then it turns into a juicio ordinario.
A juicio ordinario. And what's that?
It's a more comprehensive ordinary trial with more steps and procedures.
So the higher the stakes, the more complex the legal battle. Makes sense, I guess.
Yeah.
And who has to prove what in these lawsuits? Does filing an opposition shift the burden of proof at all?
It does. In the lawsuit, the onus is on the creditor to prove that the debt is real and that you owe it.
So they can't just waltz in and say, pay up. They have to provide evidence,
Yeah.
right?
Right. They have to show that the debt is valid and enforceable.
And on your side, you have to provide evidence that supports the reasons you gave in your opposition.
Exactly. That initial document you filed lays the groundwork for your case.
Okay, so it becomes a bit of a legal back and forth.
Yeah.
But what about the risks involved for you if you go to trial and lose?
That's something to be aware of. There's a concept called costas processuales.
Costas processuales. Sounds ominous. What does it mean?
Basically, it refers to legal costs. If you lose the case, the judge might order you to pay the other side's expenses.
Like their lawyer fees and stuff?
Exactly. So it's not just about the original debt anymore. You could end up owing even more money.
So filing an opposition is not a decision to take lightly. You have to be pretty confident in your case.
Yeah, you need to carefully consider the strength of your evidence and whether you have a solid legal argument.
Now, MCHM Abogados. They offer some specific advice for anyone facing a processo monitorio. What's the most important thing they recommend?
The number one thing, get a lawyer.
Talk to a legal professional.
As soon as possible. They can help you understand the situation, figure out your best options, and prepare a solid opposition if that's the route you choose.
So having an expert on your side can really make a difference.
Oh, absolutely. They know the ins and outs of the law and can navigate the legal process way better than someone going it alone.
Makes sense. And since this information is coming from MCHM Abogados, they naturally suggest that you could reach out to them if you need help.
Yeah, they do mention their firm's expertise. They handle all sorts of legal matters for both individuals and companies.
And they've even provided their contact info.
Yeah, they've got an office in Almeria, open Monday to Thursday, 8:00 a.m. to 7:00 p.m., and Fridays, 8:00 a.m. to 3:50 p.m. The address is Calle Santiago Vergara, number 20. Phone number is 950-106-453. They even have an emergency contact number, 674-216559. And if you prefer email, it's info@mchmabogados.es.
Okay, so they've made it pretty easy to get in touch if you need legal guidance. What else do they recommend?
Another big one is to gather your documentation.
Documentation. What kind of stuff are we talking about?
Anything that supports your case. Contracts, payment records, correspondence with the creditor, anything that backs up your reasons for opposing the claim.
So get your paperwork in order, basically.
Yeah, the more organized you are, the better prepared you'll be.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
What's their final piece of advice?
Don't forget about negotiating directly with the creditor.
That out-of-court settlement option we talked about earlier?
Exactly. It's always worth trying to reach an agreement before things escalate to a full-blown legal battle.
Okay, so to quickly summarize, if you get hit with one of these processo monitorio demands, your main options are pay up, file a formal opposition within that 20 business day window, or try to negotiate a settlement.
And if you do oppose it, be prepared for it to potentially turn into a lawsuit with all the associated costs and complexities.
And missing that deadline is a big no-no. It basically hands the win to the creditor.
You really don't want to let that happen.
So understanding your options and that super strict timeline is absolutely crucial if you want to protect yourself.
Couldn't agree more. Being proactive and informed is your best defense in these situations.
So if you're listening and this is something you might be dealing with, or even if you just want to be prepared for the future, remember those key takeaways.
Knowing your rights is the first step to effectively handling any legal matter.
It's been a fascinating deep dive into this whole processo monitorio thing. Not exactly something you'd want to experience firsthand, but it's definitely good to know what you're up against.
Agreed. Forewarned is forearmed.
Now, as we wrap up, here's something to ponder. What other situations in life have those kinds of hard deadlines that can really trip you up if you miss them?
That's a good question.
What other areas besides legal stuff have those critical windows of opportunity that you absolutely cannot miss?
I guess it could be anything, really, from financial deadlines to applications, even personal goals.
It makes you think, right? What strategies can we put in place to make sure we don't drop the ball on those important dates?
It's all about being organized, setting reminders, and being proactive.
Definitely food for thought. And on that note, thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.
See you then.